When Armin turned 24, he believed his life would follow a simple path. Finish college, find a good job, and leave behind the busy hostel life that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. The college hostel, however, had a different plan for him. The old building stood in the center of the campus like a quiet witness to thousands of student stories, friendships, heartbreaks, ambitions, and secrets that only the dimly lit corridors truly knew. Armin had been living there for almost a year, sharing a small but comfortable room with another student named Zion, who was also 24 and studying in the same college. At first, they were just two strangers forced together by the hostel administration, each trying to adjust to the habits of the other. Armin was the quiet type who preferred reading late at night, writing notes carefully, and planning his future step by step. Zion, on the other hand, had a completely different personality. He was cheerful, energetic, and the kind of person who could turn an ordinary evening into a memorable moment just by telling stories or making people laugh. During the first few weeks, their conversations were short and formal, usually about classes, assignments, or small hostel problems like the noisy students in the corridor. But as time slowly passed, the distance between them began to fade. Living in the same room meant they started sharing many small parts of daily life, waking up at the same time for morning lectures, walking together across the green college lawn, eating in the crowded cafeteria, and returning to their room late in the evening when the campus lights began glowing under the dark sky. Those simple routines slowly built a quiet friendship between them. Sometimes they would sit near the window of their room, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft orange colors, while students played football in the field nearby. Other nights they stayed awake long after midnight, talking about dreams, childhood memories, and the strange excitement of being young and uncertain about the future. Armin started noticing small things about Zion that made him smile without realizing it. The way Zion hummed songs while organizing his books, the way he laughed loudly at his own jokes, or the way his eyes sparkled whenever he spoke about his dreams of traveling the world someday. At the same time, Zion began noticing Armin's quiet strength, the calm focus in his eyes when he studied, the thoughtful advice he gave during difficult moments, and the gentle kindness hidden behind his reserved personality. Their room slowly transformed from just a shared living space into something warmer, almost like a small world of its own. The soft yellow desk lamp, the two beds placed across from each other, the stack of books on the table, and the faint sound of music sometimes playing from Zion's phone all became part of a comfortable routine that both of them had grown used to. One evening, after a long day of lectures, the sky outside turned dark earlier than usual as clouds gathered across the campus. A cool wind moved through the open window, carrying the smell of rain and wet soil. Zion was sitting on his bed scrolling through his phone while Armin was trying to focus on his notes. Suddenly Zion broke the silence with a playful comment about how boring studying looked from the outside. Armin looked up, pretending to be annoyed, but soon both of them were laughing. That moment felt simple, yet something about it felt different. The laughter lasted longer than usual, and when their eyes met briefly, a quiet feeling passed between them. Something neither of them fully understood yet. It wasn't just friendship anymore, but it wasn't something clearly defined either. That night the rain finally began to fall, tapping gently against the hostel windows while most students slowly went to sleep. Inside their room, however, the light was still on. Armin and Zion were sitting together near the window, sharing a cup of tea they had secretly made using a small electric kettle. The room felt peaceful, almost isolated from the rest of the world. As they talked softly about life, dreams, and the strange paths people take, both of them felt a growing warmth in their hearts. They didn't realize it yet, but the story of their lives was quietly changing in that small hostel room. What started as a simple roommate arrangement was slowly becoming something deeper. A connection built from late-night conversations, shared laughter, and a feeling that maybe fate had brought them together for a reason. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm, but something between Armin and Zion had subtly changed after that rainy evening. It wasn't something obvious that others could notice, but inside their small hostel room the atmosphere felt warmer, almost more personal than before. Armin still woke up early for his morning classes, carefully organizing his books and notes, while Zion often struggled to leave the comfort of his bed. Yet now, when Armin prepared to leave the room, Zion would lazily open one eye and ask him to wait for a few minutes so they could walk to class together. Those small moments slowly turned into a routine they both began to enjoy. The campus mornings were fresh and quiet, with a cool breeze moving through the trees and the soft sunlight reflecting off the college buildings. Walking side by side across the pathway, they often joked about their professors or complained about upcoming assignments. But sometimes they simply walked in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company without needing words. Their friendship continued growing in ways neither of them expected. During lunch breaks, they almost always sat at the same table in the cafeteria, even when their other friends tried to pull them into different groups. Zion loved making people laugh, and his jokes often turned ordinary meals into loud, cheerful gatherings. Armin, who used to be more reserved, slowly started opening up in those moments. He noticed how naturally Zion included him in conversations, often putting an arm around his shoulder or pulling him into playful arguments about movies, music, or sports. These gestures seemed casual, but to Armin they carried a quiet warmth that made his heart feel lighter. Evenings in the hostel became the part of the day they both looked forward to the most. After finishing their classes and dinner, they returned to their room where the outside world seemed to slow down. Sometimes they studied together, sitting on opposite sides of the desk while soft music played in the background. Other nights they forgot about studying completely and talked for hours about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Zion often spoke about traveling to different countries someday, describing beaches, mountains, and cities he had only seen in pictures. Armin listened with quiet fascination, admiring the excitement in Zion's voice and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about adventure. One night, while the rest of the hostel was unusually quiet, Zion suddenly asked Armin a strange question. They were both lying on their beds, the room lit only by the soft yellow lamp on the desk. Zion turned his head toward Armin and said, "Do you ever feel like life changes without warning?" The question sounded simple, but his voice carried a deeper meaning. Armin thought about it for a moment before answering. He said that sometimes life does change suddenly, but people often realize it only later when they look back at certain moments. Zion nodded slowly, staring at the ceiling as if he was thinking about something important. A gentle silence filled the room for a while. Outside, a cool breeze moved through the open window, making the curtain sway slightly. Armin tried to focus on the book in his hands, but his attention kept drifting toward Zion. There was something about that quiet moment that felt different, something unspoken yet deeply felt. Eventually Zion sat up and walked toward the window, looking out at the dark campus. The lights from other hostel rooms glowed faintly across the courtyard. He turned back toward Armin with a soft smile and said that meeting him had made hostel life feel less lonely. Those words stayed in the air for a moment, and Armin felt his chest tighten slightly in a way he couldn't explain. He closed his book slowly and looked at Zion. For the first time he realized how important their friendship had become. Living far from family had been difficult at first, but sharing that small room with Zion had filled many empty spaces in his life. The laughter, the conversations, the late-night tea, all of it had created a bond stronger than either of them had planned. Later that night, they decided to make tea again using their small kettle, even though hostel rules technically didn't allow it. They sat on the floor near the window with two simple cups in their hands. The campus was silent except for distant sounds of wind moving through the trees. Zion began telling a funny story about his childhood, acting out the scenes so dramatically that Armin couldn't stop laughing. The laughter slowly faded into a calm, peaceful moment where both of them simply sat together, enjoying the quiet night. As the clock moved past midnight, Zion looked at Armin again with a thoughtful expression. There was something gentle in his eyes, something that made the moment feel strangely meaningful. Neither of them spoke for several seconds, yet the silence didn't feel awkward. Instead it felt warm and comfortable, as if both of them understood something without needing to say it aloud. Eventually they returned to their beds and turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, illuminated only by faint moonlight coming through the window. Armin lay awake for a while, listening to the soft sound of the wind outside. His mind kept returning to the small moments he had shared with Zion. The laughter, the quiet conversations, and the feeling that had slowly been growing between them. Deep down, Armin began to realize that their connection was becoming something more complicated than simple friendship. He didn't know what the future would bring, and he wasn't sure how Zion felt about it either. But as sleep slowly came over him that night, one thought remained clear in his mind. Whatever this bond was becoming, it was something special, something that had quietly begun to change both of their lives inside that small college hostel room. The following weeks slowly turned the quiet connection between Armin and Zion into something deeper, something that neither of them could easily explain. Their life in the hostel continued with the same daily routine: morning classes, crowded cafeterias, late-night study sessions. But beneath that ordinary routine, there was now a growing emotional closeness that made every moment feel slightly different. Armin noticed that Zion had started spending more time in their room instead of wandering through the hostel with other friends. Sometimes he would return early from the common room just to sit beside Armin while he studied. Zion often said he was bored, but Armin secretly felt that Zion simply enjoyed being near him. One evening after dinner, the hostel corridors were filled with the usual noise of students talking loudly, music playing from someone's speaker, and the sound of footsteps echoing across the long hallway. Armin and Zion walked back to their room together, carrying a few books they had borrowed from the library. When they entered the room, Zion closed the door and dropped his bag onto the bed with a tired sigh. He stretched his arms lazily and said that college life sometimes felt like an endless cycle of lectures and assignments. Armin laughed softly and replied that it was simply part of growing up. They both sat near the window where the evening air felt cool and refreshing. The campus looked peaceful under the dim lights, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence between them. Zion began telling a funny story about one of their classmates who had accidentally fallen asleep during a lecture and started snoring loudly in the middle of class. Armin tried to stay serious but eventually burst into laughter. Moments like that had become common between them, small, simple conversations that somehow made the world feel lighter. But sometimes their conversations turned more personal. That night Zion asked Armin about his family and what life had been like before college. Armin spoke quietly about growing up in a small town, about his parents' hopes for his future, and about the pressure he sometimes felt to succeed. Zion listened carefully, his usual playful expression replaced by a calm seriousness. When Armin finished speaking, Zion said something that surprised him. He said that Armin was stronger than he believed and that anyone who truly knew him could see the kindness and determination in his character. Hearing those words made Armin feel strangely emotional. Compliments were not something he often received, especially from someone who seemed to understand him so well. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Instead he simply smiled and looked away toward the dark campus outside the window. As the night grew deeper, the hostel gradually became quiet. Many students had already gone to sleep, leaving only a few distant voices echoing through the corridor. Inside their room, the soft light of the desk lamp created a warm glow that made the space feel almost peaceful. Zion suddenly suggested that they take a short walk outside to get some fresh air. Armin agreed, and within a few minutes they were walking slowly across the campus pathway under the pale moonlight. The campus looked completely different at night. The busy daytime noise had disappeared, replaced by calm silence and cool wind moving gently through the trees. They walked side by side without speaking much, simply enjoying the quiet atmosphere. Occasionally Zion pointed toward the sky, joking about how he wished he could travel to the stars someday. Armin smiled at the childish imagination but secretly admired the dream hidden behind those words. Eventually they reached a quiet bench near the football field and decided to sit down. The grass around the field moved slightly in the wind, and the distant lights of the college buildings glowed softly in the darkness. Zion leaned back against the bench and looked toward Armin with a thoughtful expression. He said that college life had brought many interesting people into his life, but meeting Armin had been different from anything he had experienced before. Armin felt his heart beat slightly faster at those words. He tried to respond casually, saying that good friendships often appear when people least expect them. Zion nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on Armin as if he wanted to say more. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy yet strangely comfortable, as though both of them understood that their relationship had quietly crossed the boundaries of ordinary friendship. After a while, they stood up and began walking back toward the hostel building. The wind had grown colder, and the campus lights flickered gently along the pathway. When they reached their room again, Zion closed the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment, smiling softly. He joked that late-night walks might become their new habit. Armin agreed, though deep inside he knew it wasn't just the walk that mattered. It was the time they spent together. Later, as they prepared to sleep, the room fell into darkness except for faint moonlight shining through the window. Armin lay awake for several minutes, thinking about the evening they had just shared. Something about Zion's words kept returning to his mind. It felt as if their connection had moved one step closer to something deeper, something that neither of them had openly admitted yet. Across the room, Zion was also awake, staring quietly at the ceiling. Neither of them realized it, but both were thinking about the same question, whether the bond growing between them was slowly turning into something more than friendship. Outside, the wind continued to move softly through the trees, carrying the calm silence of the night across the campus. Inside the small hostel room, two young men lay awake with thoughts they had never expected to feel. Their story was still unfolding, slowly and quietly, shaped by shared moments, honest conversations, and a growing sense that fate had brought them together for a reason they were only beginning to understand. After that quiet night walk, the bond between Armin and Zion began to feel stronger than ever before. Neither of them openly spoke about the change, but both could sense that something meaningful had started growing between them. Their small hostel room, which once felt like just another student space filled with books and bags, now carried a different atmosphere. It had become a place where both of them felt comfortable sharing their thoughts, their worries, and even the moments of silence that needed no explanation. The following evening, the college campus was unusually calm. Most students were busy preparing for upcoming exams, and the hostel corridors were quieter than usual. Armin sat at the desk near the window, focusing on his notes while the soft yellow desk lamp illuminated the pages in front of him. Zion lay on his bed with one arm behind his head, listening to music through his earphones. Every now and then he looked toward Armin, as if observing him quietly while pretending to be distracted by the music. After a few minutes, Zion suddenly removed his earphones and spoke with a playful tone. He told Armin that he had been studying for hours and that his brain probably needed a break. Armin looked up from his notes and smiled faintly, admitting that he was indeed tired. Zion suggested making tea again with their small electric kettle, a secret habit they both enjoyed even though it technically broke the hostel rules. Within a few minutes, the room was filled with the comforting smell of hot tea. They sat together on the floor near the window, holding their cups while the evening wind gently moved the curtain. Outside, the sky was painted with deep shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly disappeared behind the campus buildings. The peaceful moment felt strangely intimate, as if time itself had slowed down just for them. Zion began talking about random things at first, funny hostel incidents, strange habits of their classmates, and the endless pressure of exams. Armin listened, occasionally laughing at Zion's dramatic storytelling. But after a while, the conversation gradually became quieter and more personal. Zion admitted that sometimes living far from home made him feel lonely, even when he was surrounded by people. Armin understood that feeling very well. He told Zion that he had experienced the same thing during his first months at the hostel, when everything felt unfamiliar and overwhelming. For a moment, both of them sat silently, staring at the fading sunset outside the window. Then Zion said something that caught Armin off guard. He said that meeting Armin had changed his hostel life completely. Before they became close friends, the days had felt repetitive and dull, but now even ordinary moments seemed special. Armin didn't immediately know how to respond. His heart felt slightly heavier yet warmer at the same time. He looked at Zion, noticing the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't the usual playful expression Zion often had. It was calm and genuine. Armin finally spoke softly, saying that he felt the same way. Their friendship had become one of the most important parts of his college life. The evening slowly turned into night, and the campus lights began glowing outside. The room felt quiet and peaceful. Zion placed his empty tea cup on the floor and leaned back against the wall, watching Armin thoughtfully. For a brief moment their eyes met, and the silence between them felt deeper than any conversation they had ever shared. Eventually they decided to take another short walk outside the hostel building. The night air was cool, and the moon shone brightly above the campus. As they walked along the familiar pathway, their shoulders occasionally brushed against each other. Neither of them moved away, and the small contact felt natural rather than awkward. They stopped near the same bench by the football field where they had sat a few nights earlier. The field was empty now, covered in soft moonlight. Zion sat down first and looked up at the sky, speaking quietly about how strange life could be. He said that sometimes people meet unexpectedly and end up becoming very important to each other. Armin listened carefully, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. He realized that their relationship had quietly reached a point where simple friendship no longer fully described it. Yet neither of them rushed to define what it truly was. After sitting there for a while, they returned to their room again. The hostel corridors were almost completely silent. When they entered the room, Zion switched on the small lamp while Armin closed the window to keep the cold air out. As they prepared to sleep, Zion suddenly spoke again. His voice was calm but serious. He told Armin that no matter what happened in the future, he was grateful that fate had allowed them to share the same room and become part of each other's lives. Armin felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest at those words. He nodded softly, not trusting himself to say much more. Sometimes emotions were too complex to explain with simple sentences. The lights were turned off soon after, leaving the room in darkness. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees while the campus slept peacefully. Armin lay awake for a few minutes, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Their connection had grown slowly, built through countless small moments of laughter, honesty, and shared experiences. Across the room, Zion also remained awake for a while, staring into the darkness with thoughtful eyes. Neither of them realized that the quiet bond forming between them was gradually shaping a story that would change both of their lives in ways they had never expected. As the semester moved closer to its final weeks, life on campus became busier than ever. Students hurried between classes with worried expressions. Library tables were always full, and late-night study sessions became a normal part of hostel life. Yet for Armin and Zion, those hectic days carried a different kind of energy. Even though both of them were under the pressure of upcoming exams, the time they spent together still felt calm and comforting. Their small hostel room had become a quiet escape from the chaos of college life, a place where they could relax, talk freely, and forget about everything else for a while. One evening after a long day of lectures, Armin returned to the room earlier than usual. The corridor outside was noisy with students discussing assignments, but inside the room everything felt peaceful. He placed his books on the desk and sat down near the window, staring at the slowly darkening sky. A soft breeze entered the room, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the hostel courtyard below. A few minutes later, the door opened and Zion stepped inside. He looked slightly tired, his hair messy from the wind outside, but the moment he saw Armin sitting there, a small smile appeared on his face. He dropped his bag on the bed and joked that the entire college seemed determined to drown students in assignments before the exams even began. Armin laughed softly and agreed, saying that sometimes it felt impossible to keep up with everything. Zion walked toward the window and stood beside Armin, looking outside at the quiet campus. The evening sky had turned a deep shade of blue, and the lights from the surrounding buildings had begun to glow. For a few moments neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable, like a familiar song that both of them knew by heart. After a while Zion suggested that they forget about studying for one evening and simply relax. He pulled 2 chairs closer to the window and sat down, inviting Armin to join him. Soon they were talking about random memories again. Childhood adventures, embarrassing school moments, and funny hostel incidents. Zion's storytelling was as dramatic as ever, and Armin found himself laughing more freely than he had in weeks. But beneath the laughter there was also a quiet, emotional closeness growing between them. Armin noticed how naturally their conversations flowed now, without the hesitation that had existed during their early days as roommates. Zion also seemed more comfortable sharing his thoughts and feelings, even the ones he usually kept hidden behind his playful personality. At one point, the conversation became unexpectedly serious. Zion admitted that he sometimes wondered what would happen after college ended. He said that life often pulled people in different directions, and friendships that felt strong in the present could fade away with time and distance. Armin listened carefully, understanding the worry hidden in those words. The thought of leaving the hostel someday had crossed his mind too, but he had never spoken about it aloud. After a moment, he said quietly that some connections were strong enough to survive distance and time. Real friendships, he believed, didn't disappear so easily. Zion looked at him with a thoughtful expression, as if searching for reassurance in those words. The warm light from the desk lamp reflected softly in his eyes. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence felt filled with emotion. Later that night, when the hostel corridors finally became quiet, they decided to make tea again with their small kettle. The familiar routine felt comforting. They sat near the window just like they had done many times before, holding warm cups while the cool night air moved gently through the room. The campus outside looked peaceful under the moonlight. Trees swayed slowly in the wind, and the distant sound of a dog barking echoed across the quiet courtyard. Zion leaned back against the wall and sighed softly, saying that moments like this made him wish time could slow down. Armin understood exactly what he meant. The past few weeks had been filled with small but meaningful memories, late-night conversations, quiet walks across the campus, shared laughter, and moments of unexpected honesty. Those experiences had slowly built a connection between them that felt deeper than either of them had imagined at the beginning of the semester. As midnight approached, the conversation faded into a calm silence. Zion looked at Armin again with a gentle smile and said that no matter how busy or complicated life became, he hoped they would always remember these simple moments together. Armin felt a warm emotion rise in his chest. He nodded slowly, realizing that Zion had become one of the most important people in his life during their time at the hostel. Their story had started with two strangers sharing a room, but it had gradually transformed into something far more meaningful. Eventually, they turned off the lights and prepared to sleep. The room fell into darkness except for the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Armin lay awake for a few minutes, listening to the quiet sounds of the night. He thought about the uncertain future waiting beyond college life, but for the moment he pushed those worries aside. Right now, in that quiet hostel room, everything felt calm and complete. Across the room, Zion also remained awake for a short while, staring silently at the ceiling. Both of them carried the same unspoken thought in their minds, that whatever their connection had become, it was something rare and meaningful. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees as the campus slept peacefully. Inside the small hostel room, the story of Armin and Zion continued to unfold, shaped by the quiet moments they shared and the emotions they were only beginning to understand. The days before the final exams arrived faster than either Armin or Zion had expected. The entire campus felt different during that time. Students walked quickly between the library and their hostels, their faces showing a mixture of determination and anxiety. The usually lively corridors were now quieter, filled mostly with the soft sound of pages turning and the occasional whisper of students discussing difficult topics. But inside the small room that Armin and Zion shared, the atmosphere remained warm and familiar despite the pressure of studies. Most evenings they studied together at the desk near the window. Armin often explained difficult concepts while Zion listened carefully, sometimes making jokes to lighten the serious mood. Their teamwork had become natural, almost effortless. When one of them felt tired or frustrated, the other always seemed to notice immediately and find a way to bring back a little energy to the room. Sometimes it was through humor, sometimes through a simple conversation that had nothing to do with books or exams. One late evening, after several hours of studying, Zion suddenly pushed his notebook aside and stretched his arms with a dramatic sigh. He complained that if he continued studying any longer his brain might completely stop working. Armin laughed softly and closed his book as well, admitting that he also needed a short break. The room felt quiet except for the soft humming sound of the small desk fan. Outside the window, the campus looked calm under the pale glow of streetlights. Zion walked toward the window and opened it slightly, letting the cool night air enter the room. He leaned against the wall beside it and looked at Armin with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what life will look like after all of this?" he asked quietly, gesturing toward the stack of books and notes on the desk. Armin paused for a moment before answering. He said that he thought about it sometimes, but the future always seemed uncertain. There were too many possibilities and too many unknown paths. Zion nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. For a while, they simply stood near the window, looking out at the silent campus. A few students were still walking along the pathways, their footsteps echoing faintly in the distance. The peaceful atmosphere made the moment feel strangely emotional. Zion eventually spoke again, his voice softer than usual. He said that college had been an important chapter in his life, not just because of the education but because of the people he had met along the way. Then he added something that made Armin's heart beat a little faster. He said that sharing a room with Armin had been one of the best parts of his entire college experience. Armin felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest. Over the past months he had come to value their friendship deeply, but hearing Zion say it so honestly made the feeling even stronger. He smiled gently and replied that he felt the same way. Life in the hostel would have been very different without Zion's presence. The conversation gradually turned lighter again. They joked about their classmates, remembered funny hostel incidents, and talked about the plans they had for the upcoming vacation after exams. Zion spoke enthusiastically about traveling somewhere new, while Armin admitted that he mostly looked forward to resting after months of busy college life. Later that night, they decided to step outside for a short walk to clear their minds. The campus air felt cool and refreshing after hours spent inside the room. The pathways were nearly empty, and the moonlight created long shadows across the quiet lawns. As they walked slowly beside each other, their shoulders occasionally brushed together. The small contact felt natural now, something neither of them noticed much anymore. They had become used to each other's presence in a way that felt both comforting and meaningful. They eventually stopped near the same bench by the football field where they had spent quiet moments before. Sitting there again felt familiar, almost symbolic of the bond they had built during their time together. The field stretched out in front of them, covered in soft moonlight and surrounded by tall trees moving gently in the wind. Zion leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees as he looked at the empty field. After a moment, he said something thoughtful. He said that sometimes the most important parts of life were not the big achievements people chased, but the simple memories they shared with others. Armin understood exactly what he meant. Many of his favorite memories from college were not related to exams or lectures, but to the quiet moments he had spent with Zion, late-night tea, long conversations, and peaceful walks like this one. They sat there for a long time, enjoying the calm silence of the night. Eventually, the cool wind reminded them that it was getting late, and they slowly returned to their hostel building. Back inside their room, Zion switched on the small desk lamp while Armin closed the window. The familiar space suddenly felt even more special than before. Every corner of the room seemed to hold a memory from the past months. Before turning off the light, Zion looked at Armin again with a gentle smile. He said that no matter where life took them in the future, he hoped they would always remember the time they had shared in that small hostel room. Armin nodded quietly, feeling the truth of those words. Their connection had grown slowly but naturally, built from honesty, trust, and countless small moments that had shaped their story together. Soon the light was turned off, leaving the room in darkness. Outside, the wind continued to move softly through the trees, while the campus slept peacefully. Armin lay awake for a few minutes, thinking about everything that had happened during their time at the hostel. He realized that their story had become one of the most meaningful parts of his college life. Across the room, Zion was also awake for a short while, staring silently into the darkness with a calm expression. Neither of them spoke, yet both understood that their connection had become something special, something that would remain important even after the busy days of college were over. The final week of the semester arrived quietly, yet it carried a strange mix of emotions for everyone on campus. Some students felt excited about the coming vacation, while others were overwhelmed by the pressure of their last exams. For Armin and Zion, however, the final days of the semester felt deeper than just academic stress. Both of them knew that the chapter of their hostel life was slowly reaching its end, and that realization brought a sense of nostalgia that neither of them could ignore. Their room looked slightly different now. Books and notes were scattered across the desk. Exam schedules were pinned to the wall, and half-packed bags sat in the corner waiting for the day they would leave the hostel. Yet despite the busy atmosphere, the room still carried the same warmth it had developed over the past months. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. The window where they had shared countless late-night conversations, the desk where they had studied together, and the floor where they had often sat with cups of tea while talking about life. One evening after finishing an important exam, Armin and Zion returned to their room feeling both relieved and exhausted. The sun was slowly setting outside, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. For the first time in many days, neither of them felt the pressure to open a book or revise notes. They simply sat quietly near the window, enjoying the peaceful moment. Zion leaned back against the wall and looked around the room thoughtfully. He said that it was strange how a place that once felt unfamiliar had become so important to them. When he had first moved into the hostel, it had seemed like just another temporary stop in his life. But over time, it had turned into a space filled with memories and meaningful moments. Armin nodded slowly, understanding exactly what Zion meant. When he first arrived at the hostel, he had expected nothing more than a quiet place to sleep and study. He had never imagined that sharing a room with someone would change his life in such a meaningful way. For a few minutes they talked about the past months, their first awkward days as roommates, the funny incidents in the hostel corridors, the nights they stayed awake talking about their dreams, and the peaceful walks they had taken across the campus under the moonlight. Remembering those moments made both of them smile, yet there was also a quiet sadness hidden behind the laughter. Later that night, they decided to take one last walk around the campus before the semester officially ended. The air felt cool and refreshing, and the pathways were almost empty as most students were busy preparing for their remaining exams. They walked slowly across the familiar grounds, passing the library building, the cafeteria, and the football field where they had spent many quiet moments together. Everything looked the same as before, yet the atmosphere felt different because they knew their time there was coming to an end. Eventually they stopped near the same bench by the football field where they had often sat during their late-night conversations. The field stretched out peacefully under the soft glow of the campus lights. Zion sat down first, resting his arms on his knees while looking out across the quiet grass. After a moment he spoke softly, saying that sometimes the most meaningful relationships in life appear unexpectedly. He admitted that when he first met Armin, he had never imagined they would become so close. But over time, the simple moments they had shared had created a bond that meant more to him than he could easily explain. Armin listened carefully, feeling the weight of those words. The quiet honesty in Zion's voice made the moment feel deeply emotional. He realized that he felt the same way. Their connection had grown slowly and naturally, without any plan or expectation. Armin finally spoke, saying that meeting Zion had been one of the best parts of his entire college journey. Without their friendship, many of the memories he now cherished would never have existed. Zion smiled gently at those words. For a moment they simply sat there in silence, looking out at the peaceful campus that had been the setting for their story. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the calm sounds of the night. Eventually they stood up and began walking back toward the hostel building. Neither of them spoke much during that walk, but the quiet silence between them felt meaningful rather than uncomfortable. When they reached their room again, the familiar space seemed even more special than before. It was no longer just a simple hostel room. It was the place where their story had grown from a simple friendship into a deep emotional connection. Before turning off the light, Zion looked at Armin with a thoughtful expression and said that no matter what happened in the future, he would always remember the time they had shared in that room. Armin smiled softly and nodded. Some memories, he knew, stayed with people forever. Soon the light was turned off, and the room fell into darkness once again. Outside, the campus remained quiet under the night sky. As Armin lay in bed, He realized that the story of his college life would always include the moments he had shared with Zion, the laughter, the conversations, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Across the room, Zion also remained awake for a few minutes, thinking about the same memories. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would bring, but both understood one important thing. The final morning in the hostel, the connection they had built during their time in that small hostel room would always remain a meaningful part of their lives. Noise and energy. And in that quiet moment, sunlight slowly entered the room through the half-open windows, spreading their story reached a calm and heartfelt ending, and the wooden floor. One built not only on romance and emotion, this small room had been the center of Armin and Zion's daily lives, and the unforgettable memories they had created together. Their long conversations, their laughter, and the quiet moments when words were not needed. Now, as the semester ended and students prepared to leave, the room felt different. Still warm with memories but carrying a gentle sadness that both of them could feel. Armin woke up first that morning. He sat up slowly on his bed and looked around the room. Most of their belongings were already packed. The desk that had once been covered with books and notebooks now looked almost empty. The walls that had been decorated with exam schedules and small notes were bare again. It felt strange seeing the room so quiet and simple, as if time had suddenly moved forward faster than expected. A few minutes later, Zion woke up as well. He stretched lazily and then noticed Armin sitting near the window. For a moment, he simply watched him in silence. The morning sunlight reflected softly on Armin's face, and the peaceful atmosphere made the moment feel calm yet emotional. Zion stood up and walked toward the window, standing beside Armin just like he had done many evenings before. Neither of them spoke immediately. They simply looked out at the campus one last time. Students were moving around outside with suitcases and bags, preparing to leave for their homes. The familiar pathways that had once been filled with daily routines now felt like part of a story that was slowly closing. After a while, Zion broke the silence with a gentle smile. He said that it was hard to believe how quickly time had passed. It felt like only yesterday that they had first met as strangers sharing a room. Armin nodded quietly, remembering those early days when they barely knew each other. Neither of them had imagined that such a strong bond would grow between them. They spent the next hour organizing the last of their belongings. Every small object seemed to remind them of a memory. An old notebook from their first classes together, the small kettle they had secretly used to make tea at night, and even the chair where they had often sat during their long conversations. Packing those things felt like closing the pages of a chapter that had been filled with meaningful moments. Eventually, everything was ready. Their bags stood near the door, waiting for the moment they would leave the room for the last time. Before walking out, both of them paused and looked around once more. The quiet room seemed almost symbolic of the journey they had shared there. Zion took a slow breath and said something that carried deep sincerity. He told Armin that meeting him had been one of the most important parts of his college life. The friendship they had built had turned ordinary days into unforgettable memories. Armin felt a warm emotion in his chest as he listened. He replied that he felt the same way. The hostel might have been just a temporary place, but the experiences they had shared there would always remain a meaningful part of their lives. They finally stepped out of the room together and walked down the hostel corridor. The hallway that had once been full of voices and laughter now echoed with quiet footsteps. As they walked outside, the fresh morning air greeted them, carrying the familiar scent of the campus trees. Before leaving the hostel building, they decided to take one last walk across the campus. They passed the library where they had spent long evenings studying, the cafeteria where they had shared countless meals, and the football field where they had often sat together during quiet nights. When they reached the bench near the field, they stopped for a moment. This place had been the setting for many of their meaningful conversations. Standing there again made the memories feel even more real. Zion looked toward Armin with a calm but emotional expression. He said that even though life would take them in different directions after college, he hoped they would never lose the connection they had built. Armin smiled gently and promised that some friendships were strong enough to last beyond distance and time. Their story might be moving into a new chapter, but the memories they had created together would always remain. After that final moment, they continued walking toward the campus gate where many other students were leaving as well. The bright morning sunlight filled the open space, symbolizing a new beginning waiting ahead. Before parting, Zion extended his hand in a friendly gesture, but instead of shaking it formally, Armin pulled him into a brief and warm hug. It was a simple moment, yet it carried the meaning of everything they had experienced together. They stepped back with small smiles, understanding that sometimes the most meaningful stories do not need dramatic endings. Instead, they live on in the memories and the quiet promise that the connection between two people will continue in different ways. As they walked away in different directions, the campus remained peaceful under the bright sky. The chapter of their hostel life had ended, but the story of Armin and Zion would always remain in their hearts. A story built from friendship, trust, quiet romance, and the unforgettable moments they had shared in a small room that had once been their world.